Hello,
Hi, Sharon. How you doing, man?
I'm doing good. How are you doing?
Oh, it was the headphones. Okay.
We're good to go now, Aiden?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay. Aiden couldn't hear me at first, but I can hear both of you guys. How you both doing?
doing all right. This is our last
Yeah.
day of break,
Congratulations.
so it's a bit sad. But
That's what?
it's our last day of Christmas break, so it's a bit sad. But
Boo. Oh, that you guys go back on a Tuesday. Oh, okay. They give you one extra day. Nice.
yeah,
That's how it is at our school. They keep on some teacher lesson thing that all the teachers complain about.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Hey, every day counts, so I'd take it. Um, Congratulations, Sharon, on getting into Emory.
thank you.
Really cool. Aiden, have you heard back? I would imagine you haven't, but I was just
No, it's
curious.
way too soon.
In the last couple of days. Okay, cool. That's exciting, guys. Are you looking forward to anything in this new semester, or are you just like depressed that you have to go back to school?
Depressed that I have to go
I'm
back to school.
I'm just waiting for it to be over. That's about it.
Yeah.
Um,
This is you got to remind me, this is both of your last semesters, right?
yeah.
Yep.
It's done. You start college somewhere next fall. Sharon, did you get in anywhere else, or are you just like, no, I know where I'm going?
Well, I applied early decision, so I can't really wait
Oh,
to get anywhere else. So
okay, cool,
I got
cool.
into like OU and Tulsa though. I got
Okay, cool. I know Aiden got into those places as well, so that's
Yeah.
great.
I'm just waiting right now to see uh, my results, and then I'll make a decision from there.
Cool. I think I don't know for sure because I just don't remember, but I think OU it's a pretty good well-known program in political science. There's a few state schools that are however they do the rankings really high, like Ohio State, uh Wisconsin, Minnesota, um, a bunch of the UC schools, and I think Oklahoma University is in there as well, University of Oklahoma. But
Yeah, there's no shame in going there. It's a great school.
yeah, well, I mean, and if anything, depending on what you're studying, it would actually be better than some of these um, other schools that might be a little more flashy for people that don't know. Not saying that's Emory or anything. I'm just wherever you go, I encourage you guys. You've probably been told this a million times, but um, to like look past just the name because I mean you can get things almost at any undergrad institution. They are largely similar, but there's some little things that some people might find better, and especially if you're interested in like grad school later on, there can be some benefits to the resources that are available at some schools compared to others. But all in all, I'm of the mindset that it is what you make of it. It's not the end of the world where you end up
yeah.
going. Cool. Well,
Oh,
you guys had a bunch of really interesting questions, and we had a really great conversation a few weeks ago, and then it didn't get recorded. So I know we're
I'm
doing
sorry
this
about
again.
that, but I
No,
got
no,
the
no,
recording going.
This
no,
was
no, no.
that was our first interview.
No, no, it's all
We're
good. So I know some of this will be for your audience's sake or whatever, but I don't remember everything I said, so maybe we'll still, I'm sure, have an interesting conversation here. But
Well,
I'll let you guys take it away. You can ask me whatever you want.
so this is kind of going off topic a bit, but we found something online. And have you ever heard of a guy by the name of Michael Phillips by any chance?
Yes, because he just created fantasy articles about me and almost everybody. Uh, it actually was pretty annoying for me. I can't control what other people say, but it was one of the top Google searches,
Yeah.
and it's just a fabricated article. The only thing about it is that I was an Army Ranger. I think that's the only, and I was running for president. Other than that, everything practically that he said was just completely made up. And it's unfortunate because if you Google my name and well, if you just Google my name, I wasn't even famous enough in the first place. So you'd get like there was a Major League Lacrosse player with my he still exists, but he doesn't play anymore. That was like the number one result if you were to Google Chris Garrity. And I know this because I would occasionally Google as I was along in the campaign to see if anything was going on. I think that article got written about a month or two before the election,
It was
and
October.
Oh,
I had people who even knew me who were like, "This doesn't seem like you. Like, what?" And the thing is, if you, I think it's behind a paywall or registration wall. If you read the whole article, by the end, you have to realize it's made up. Like
yeah, he
one of
makes
the
You
you.
things
telling
it's
me the squirrel story
yeah, I
is
released a
fake?
squirrel and I was talking about like mandatory tree planting day, all this
Yeah.
nonsense. Like no, none of that is real or true. And but the weird thing about it is it's vaguely accurate enough with like some of my just personal information, like my veteran background or the fact that I'm running for president, that uh if you didn't know me, it could until you get to the end of the article where I'm like wrestling a squirrel that I just released, it can seem somewhat plausible, I guess. And it was inaccurate. So it made me look like if you just knew nothing about me other than reading that article, I would look like a complete like insane weirdo. So, but nothing you can do about that. I can't control it. I didn't coordinate with anything going on for my media wise. I ran my
Mhm.
own YouTube channel and built my own website. That was it. And the thing is, like, I never got famous enough to really be publicly known, but major candidates have to deal with that all the time. You can't control. It's the United States and it's the internet. You can't control what other people say, um, much as the campaigns and parties often try to. They can't. And so you have people saying nonsense about major candidates and minor candidates all the time. I don't know that person. I don't even know if it's
I
an
don't.
AI
Okay.
bot or if it's a real person.
I've looked
But
at their articles, and their first eight are all AI generated. I checked, so I'm
For
not
some
even
reason,
sure.
the article about you, it says it's 100% human though. So
I don't
yeah,
know.
and so a few people told me about that I would either get asked about it or they'd be like, some like weirdo is writing something about you. And um yeah, well, I mean, it's Medium, so it's just a blog area.
Yeah.
It's like if someone wrote something on Reddit or TikTok, like, okay, I'm not even gonna know. Uh and you know, like I said, people have to deal with people saying false things about people all the time. I mean, that people pointed out to me that other articles that the bot or whatever had written were much less flattering. Mine just was kind of silly. Um, but no, I don't know the person, and I don't even know if they're real. And yeah, I'd practically forgotten about that till you guys brought it up too.
it
I
was
mean,
just very interesting because what was the incentive?
Well, yeah, and that really goes to it. Like, there's obviously an incentive for partisan media outlets to like
Yeah.
destroy the other candidates' reputations, but I don't know I don't even know if it's a real thing. I don't know if it's a person. I have no reason to think they had anything personal against me. And I mean, it's not like even it was that well. It was that widely read. It was just one of the top things if you Googled my name for the last 2 months of the election that would come up. And I am an environmentalist, but not in the way that the parties would define it, probably, and certainly not in the way that article made me seem like a psychotic, homeless
for lack of a better
weirdo.
word, would hippie be like the right
Yeah,
term?
yeah, almost, right? Like
Yeah.
like the things that the article said are exactly what people fake environmentalists think environmentalism is, which is like heeding to parties, heeding to corporate greenwashing, and heeding to just being a weirdo for like publicity's sake. Um, practical things like reducing pollution, um, or uh, giving people infrastructure environments to be able to make their own choices and to be able to take steps that don't involve hurting the environment. I think that's being a real environmentalist. For most other people, it's just performative. I certainly think for the political parties, it's performative. So, but most people, when they think of like hardcore environmentalists, which is I think what that article labeled me, they would think about somebody standing on a corner talking about releasing squirrels and making a national tree planting day or something like that. I don't. I'm. I have planted many, 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 many trees before, and I've done plenty of that stuff, but never, uh, you know, as a performative thing. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know what the motivation was. I don't even know if the article's still up. But like, I even had a cousin that like knows me. It's like, this doesn't seem like you. What is this article? I'm like, did you read the whole thing? It's obviously just fiction. Even like I remember one thing I liked about it though was there was some cool AI generated like cover photo that I was like,
Yeah,
oh, that's way better than any of the art I have.
I think I see. It's like the one of you like with like half military and like half like president. I remember
The
seeing
It,
really patriotic one.
yeah. It looks like, somebody that would hire somebody to make a like a cartoon background or whatever. But um, yeah, no, that's all just fiction, and I have nothing to do with it.
So it kind of brings up an interesting point about environmentalism and like the two political parties. What do you think makes like both their agendas regarding the environment very like disingenuous per se?
Well, yeah, for me, it's disingenuous because anytime you look at the agendas they claim they're going to do, very rarely do things change in major ways. So, it, no matter where you stand on some of these issues, the kind of general view I would say is that the Democratic Party is more environmentally friendly, and however you look at it, they're in favor of reducing fossil fuel outputs, um, and what they consider green energy. And that many people in those parties may very well see it that way. Many people outside of that party may very well see it that way. But has there been any major changes in that front? I would say no. When you look at Rhode Island, for example, where I worked and lived for a long time, you look out from the College Hill, a politically active, rich neighborhood in Providence, which is the political epicenter of Rhode Island, and you look out and you see windmills generating wind power electricity, and you'll think to yourself, wow, Rhode Island is so green. But an overwhelming amount of their um, electrical grid and their electrical generation comes from natural gas and fossil fuels. That's not to say that in and of itself is a good or bad thing, but if you ask people things all the time about political science or about political um, platforms, the public's awareness of reality tends to be disconnected from reality. Um, for example, if I were to ask you guys, and this isn't to put you on the spot, if I were to ask you guys what percentage of the federal budget gets spent on foreign aid, you don't have to say what you think. What do you think the public would say?
I'd probably say a lot
Much
more than
larger.
actually it is.
Well, yeah, so just, I mean, throw out a number just for the sake of
80.
our 80?
I mean that's kind
Okay.
of ridiculous, man.
30.
30.
30. Okay. It's less than 1%.
Right.
No, it's not even 1%. Um, and yet a lot of times this is some of the more high profile things that get talked about on cable news. And I know people our age and younger, like, cable news is not super relevant, but people my age and older, it is, and or it was, and you'll see stories run all the time about, oh, we're sending all this money to insert country X, and military aid isn't always put into the calculations for foreign aid, so certainly it can be higher than 1% if you include some of those things. But at a standard level, that's not to say that it shouldn't be higher or lower, but just the awareness of that is disconnected from what it actually is. And if I were to ask you, for example, what largest um, the largest item of expenditure is for the federal government, what do you think the public would generally say?
Military.
Military? What do you think, Sharon?
I was gonna say military as well. Like,
Right. And that is usually what people say, and it's a distant third. Um, If you it's military if you define it as discretionary spending, but as overall, it's a distant third behind what most governments in developed modern state systems have. Most of them spend the vast majority of their money on income insurance and medical insurance, which is the top two expenditure items for our federal government, mostly in the form of Social Security and Medicare. But there's some other things that go into that as well. And again, even that's not to say that it shouldn't be higher or it shouldn't be lower, but it's just there's a huge disconnect between what people think. And you guys are educated, obviously. I've talked with you before, and those answers are very common. I ask these questions all the time when I've been teaching at an Ivy League university, and I get the same responses. Sometimes I do it in person, sometimes I do it as an anonymous poll. And military as the number one expenditure item, that's standard response, and much higher than 1% for foreign aid is a standard response. There's other questions I could use like that, but those are two common ones that are often asked in international relations classes or political science classes um, to demonstrate that there is that disconnect. And so when it comes to environmental policy, I think there's a disconnect as well. Most of what the federal government does is it takes money from citizens and it distributes it for things that it is labeled public goods or it is labeled for the greater good. Um, and it also, we could theoretically say it keeps uh, order and like the general populace from using violence to significantly change how things are done. Outside of that, a lot of it is theater, I would say. You get people talking all the time. Some states, their legislators, they meet part-time. Other states, it's a full-time job. For our federal government, it's considered a full-time job, but you can be the judge of whether your representative is actually spending what could be considered a full time of work each week on public goods.
Right. And do you think like the prominence of political parties within our like system has led to this huge disconnect between the like the public and what the actuality is, or do you think
Yes.
the media plays a larger role, more so?
No, I think political parties do. You know, th People like to say the media does this and that, and there's all right now the Democratic Party is has for a while really been trying to push against what it labels misinformation and disinformation, and usually those are just things the Republican Party is putting out that they don't either want to be put out or that they think are wrong. And the Republicans are also saying that there should be greater government involvement against companies, particularly social media companies, being able to determine what gets spread on their platforms or not. These narratives aren't new, they're probably not going to stop. But at the end of the day, the political parties are consciously trying to shift these narratives. And because they have um, such a dominant role in federal politics and state politics, they um, they have messages that they put out, and those messages tend to get a lot of airtime. So, like for example, I think cable news, your major cable news media outlets. Those, for much of the last 20, 30 years, have had a pretty major role to play in the narrative diffusion. Um, I don't consider them a valuable source of information for almost anything, except so I can know what other people are going to be saying and talking about. They're a really good, quick way to be like, okay, this is what people who watch insert channel, whatever, are going to be thinking or thinking that they're thinking that day. And this is what's going to dominate the conversation. And it's not just like people who aren't educated or who don't watch a lot of the media. It can have second, third, fourth order diffusions. And I hear the same narratives being talked about in the when I'm around federal legislators or when I'm at these prestigious universities that are having classes or having discussions about the same thing. That doesn't mean I think everybody is being fed news that like five people with cigars and smoky rooms are deciding. I think there's a lot more to it where media outlets make their money selling advertisements. So they need to draw in attention from certain demographics that they target. And so they do that not necessarily with an eye towards giving out the truth, but with an eye towards giving out what they think will draw viewership. Um, and I don't think that the government should have a major role to play in changing that. I think um, at the end of the day, the public can decide, okay, this is a waste of time. It's like watching TMZ for news, and I can get my information from elsewhere. Um, or they can say, no, I really like this and stay watching what they watch. That's everybody's choice. I don't think it should be my decision or anyone's major decision to be like, no, you can't look at this or no, you can't be exposed to this because I think that's just silly.
Would you say that uh, we were Sharon was saying parties, but would you say that that's if there were more political parties, like significant political parties than just the two party system, would that change anything?
I don't think so. And my evidence would be if you look at media in countries that do have multi-party democracies. So, for example, I mean, the UK, the United Kingdom still has two major parties, but they do have more parties that have seats in their parliament. Canada does as well. Um, Germany has a multi-party democracy. Even Russia, they have a dominant party, but there are other political parties in Russia. It's just the the party that supports President Putin is the dominant one right now. Um, but if you look at media in these other countries, they often have narratives that tend to feed one larger narrative for a party or another. This is my view anyway. Um, and so much people ask me, in politics or in an academic setting, what are some news outlets that I think aren't biased or are more useful? I don't think there's such thing as a non-biased news outlet. I'm biased, everybody's biased because everybody has limited perspectives. What I think the difference between bias and deception is are you being willfully neglectful of trying to convey the truth or not? And I don't think that a multi-party system is necessarily going to be better for that. I think political parties in and of themselves exist for one reason, and that's to perpetuate power. So you look at the major political parties now in this country, over time, in other countries, and you'll see their platforms shift drastically over time, but they keep the same brand because it's useful and it's already entrenched. So in the United States, political parties overwhelmingly control elections, as my whole campaign was having to deal with that the whole time, where there's a list of rules for people to run, and then there's a list of rules for parties to run, and they're vastly different. And you know, they are legal. Most of it I wouldn't say is illegal or anything, but it's there because there are legal hurdles that are harder to jump through for nonpartisans. These can be in the form of signature requirements that are different for an established party versus a non-established party or an independent. They can be um, donor fundraising requirements, which theoretically you shouldn't have to be rich to run for political office, but practically you do have to be. I mean, just the filing fees. Like if you take out having no budget for travel, no budget for campaigning or anything, just the filing fees to get on the ballot for president of the United States this past election, um, I want to say they'd be about $40,000. I don't know about you guys, but most people don't have $40,000 to just like spend on filing fees. Um, and that's bare minimum, much less fees to get your so that's the filing fees for the Secretaries of State's offices, much less filing fees to get forms notarized. Often notarizing a form costs, anywhere between $5 to $8 to 20-ish bucks, depending on what it is. I mean, it varies, but usually it's pretty common in a state. And if you think about having to get 10 forms notarized, so that you can submit them along with a filing fee, just to have your votes counted, not even to be on the ballot, just to have your votes counted. Um, that is, those are the rules. Those are the rules that duly elected officials have set. But a lot of people don't know that. It comes back to this disconnect between how people think the government works or how people think public policy is enacted and the reality of the situation. And I don't think that's even necessarily something that requires, oh, people just need to spend more time in politics. There's way more important things than politics. Um, but until people put a little bit more effort or just change their minds, maybe it has nothing to do with their effort. Maybe they like the status quo. But it's not going to change unless some of these more mundane, arcane rules change, in my view. So, for example, in Oklahoma, there were 5 people that could be voted for president. Nobody else. Doesn't matter if you wrote something in. Oklahoma's ballot doesn't even have a slot for it. Um, but that, every state is unique, but that's somewhat normal. In California, there were 7 people, including write-ins, that could be voted on. Um, in uh, in in many states, it was between 5 and 15, and most of those weren't on the ballot. So, for example, I think I was one of, I don't remember what it was, 20 people that could be voted on in New York. New York ballot access is very difficult. New York write-in access is extraordinarily easy for such a large state. Um, So it varies widely, but um, the political parties themselves getting their own rules, I think, is problematic. The um, to put common arguments against my view, people would say, well, political parties are organized and they have a lot of support. If they didn't have the access that they've worked towards, then you would be disregarding large groups of people's views. Or, I obviously disagree with that argument because I think that it doesn't ignore their views. It just doesn't give them pride of place or outsized influence on things. But and political parties can be formed, new ones can be formed. In United States history, neither the Democratic nor the Republican parties existed at the nation's founding. The modern Democratic Party traces its history back to the 1820s largely, and the Republican Party traces its history back to the 1850s, 1860s largely. But before the time, there still were often 2 major factions, and they morphed, and sometimes they'd go through these periods where the political landscape, historians and political scientists would say, drastically changed. But for the US's entire history, it's mostly been 2 major factions that have been vying for control over the federal government. Um, During this past election, some candidates who called themselves independents either co-opted state parties or formed new political parties, and that was easier to do than to run as an independent, the way I did in those states. In some states, there are state level political parties that have a decent amount of power, and I mean, like, those parties don't exist outside of the state. For example, in some of the Great Lakes states or in New York. In New York, it's kind of interesting because you can run and get the nomination, get listed as a nominee of multiple parties. So these state level parties in New York, they'll still end up supporting or endorsing or nominating one of the major candidates. But, to get those nominations, sometimes those candidates will have to make promises or make certain concessions. So those state level parties do have a little bit of power, and they only exist in New York. So, political parties are dominant in the United States and elsewhere, but um, the problem is people don't realize how dominant they are. They think that, oh, if enough people write in somebody, then we can make a change. And that's not how it works. Only 10 states in the country will count every vote for president as write-ins. And even then, they may not. They will only do it if enough write-ins are done. So Washington State, whose Secretary of State's office was very approachable and very good at communicating with me, I don't think they ended up even um, counting my votes in that state because if every write-in vote had been for me, which I'm sure it wasn't, it wouldn't have made a difference. Washington is overwhelmingly went for Harris. So some states do that, but there's only 10 states that do that. There's 10 states that won't count write-ins at all, Oklahoma among them. And then the other 30-ish states, it varies widely, but most of them you're not going to, even if you wrote in a name, it's usually not going to be counted unless somebody went through a lot of effort very often to get on that ballot, which is what I spent much of my time doing after this summer when the windows closed for regular ballot access in most states.
So, I wanted to clarify something because I never really thought about this until our last interview, and I think Aiden had the same like thought process. Like
Mhm.
there's when you say like political parties, you include third party candidates as well. Because usually whenever
Yes.
people use the term independents, they also kind of lump in like the Green Party and like the Libertarian Party. So do they
Yeah.
hold the same like sort of power almost as like the major parties? Like do they still have the same access to like these like benefits of being a political party and getting on the ballot easier and whatnot?
Yeah. I wouldn't say any of the parties you named have the same influence as the two major parties, but so third by last I checked, which I don't know that I looked that my ranking is up to date with the 2024 election, but generally, as far as membership goes, Democratic Party has a pretty significant edge over membership over the Republican Party, and then after that, it's the Libertarians, then the Greens, and I'm behind them. It's well, let's see, what was that party that there were some new parties created during this election to allow some people to get on the ballot, but generally it's been Democratic Party, Republican Party, Libertarian Party, Green Party, Constitution Party, and then various flavors of communist parties that they have different. Some of them are more active in some states, or they have different names. If you look at a lot of the candidates who had ballot access in various states this year that weren't part of the like the top five, six parties. They were various types of socialist communist parties, and some of them got tens of thousands or maybe even broke into the six figures. I know there was a candidate named Claudia de la Cruz, and I think that she got over 100,000, and well, much of her base is in California, and they have access there. But Libertarian Party generally has access in almost every state automatically. And the Green Party has access in many states automatically. They do not have to go through the same processes as people without parties have to. Um, uh, a lot of times, the performance in the last election is a requisite for that easier ballot access in the following one. This isn't unique to the United States either. I mean, the specifics of it is, but you see parties rise and fall sometimes because of the success they had in the previous election, where now they have greater access. In some multi-party democracies, you have to get a minimum number of votes in order to get any seats in parliament. Even in these democracies where, a certain party will have onesies and twosies seats. The Green Party, if you look at the Green Party in Germany, the Green Party in Germany is historically has been one of the more um, influential Green parties in the world. And they've had times where they have risen significantly and fallen significantly in history. Um, so, and the Green Party and Libertarian Party, Constitution Party in the United States are all part of it. And there are other parties as well. There are lots of other parties. Revolutionary Communist Party. Um, there are some offshoots of parties that formed just to because they disagreed with the Constitution Party, for example, or the Green Party, or other socialist parties. Um, the Prohibition Party, the oldest party that's continuously run a candidate in the United States. It had ballot access in Arkansas alone this year. And obviously, as far as I am aware, I'm not an expert in the Prohibition Party, but the Prohibition Party no longer is about, just pushing, um, you know,
Anti-alcohol.
prohibition of alcohol.
Yeah.
They still have things they stand for, and I'm fairly certain that is not their main platform anymore, but they still have they still have a party. So um, yeah, that's how political parties in the United States work.
All right. One of the like while I was like we're doing some research for this interview, one of like the main things that people point out whenever it comes to like oh how political parties have more power than whatnot is straight ticket voting, which if I'm recalling correctly, it's where you can just straight up say, oh I want to vote Democrat for like
Yeah.
every single election. And
Mhm.
what are your thoughts on straight ticket voting? I just wanted to gauge them.
I'm not sure I understand your question. Like,
Like
I mean, straight ticket voting is legal, and in some places you can automatically punch something or check it or click on a screen. Um,
do you think it's another barrier for
You think it propagates the political parties?
well, it does, but I mean, I don't see anything wrong with it. If people want to vote for a party, then they should be allowed to, and that just makes it easier for them. So no, I think it's fine. A lot of people do vote on political parties. You guys, I'm confident you can't. Well, maybe we did this last time. Most people cannot name their state representative. Or in New Hampshire, for example, where I live, we have multi-member districts. You'll see it often in other countries. It's not very common in the United States, but in my little the legislature in New Hampshire is enormous. It's one of the largest in democracy in the world, and it's a state with a couple million people. But my little district for the lower house of New Hampshire has four representatives. So we vote for, you know, we basically pick up to four, and then the top four vote getters are the ones that represent that district in New Hampshire. Um, I don't think there's anything wrong with being allowed to vote for a political party. So no, but since most people do, and since most people don't know their state representatives and have no idea, even remotely, the mechanics of elections, voting for a party, depending on how you view things, is seen as um, outsourcing the research and decision making to institutions or people that you trust. And I mean, anyone is going to do that. I don't know everything about politics. There's no person that does. At the end of the day, a lot of what you do in business or school or politics is about trusting an institution or an individual or something. But no, I don't think it should be made illegal, for example. People tend to vote on party lines, and much of the history of studying political science has been studying American elections. And much of the history of studying American elections and theorizing about it is based on partisan voting. So for the longest time, decades ago, the general theory was people vote based on the partisan leaning of their parents. You're raised in a Republican or Democratic house, you're more likely to vote Republican or Democrat. Um, Today, a lot of theories about voting have to do with either increasing your party's voter turnout or decreasing the turnout of the opposition party. Um, like even in this election, there was a lot of people that voted, but I actually don't remember what the voter turnout was for this election, but I would be willing to guess it's somewhere between 40 and 60%. That means about half the country. And by the way, half of the country that can legally vote did not vote in this election, much less the people that are not allowed to legally vote. So, um, I think there is a lot more to it than just being allowed to straight ticket vote. And this argument can come up too when people talk about term limits. I am, I made a point of running on one term. But I'm not in favor of term limits because I think the term limit is stop voting for the incumbent. Not being allowed to legally vote for somebody that's good at their job, I think is a problem. But so many people do vote for incumbents. But I don't think that's a problem with the legal voting system. I think it's a problem with um, people voting. I think if you're tired of an incumbent being an incumbent, then stop voting for them. Like it's that simple. It really is. And even with all these structural barriers in place for independence, the solution, even for this last election, was just, hey, don't vote for the major candidates. People aren't going to do that. There's all sorts of reasons, or they didn't do that. But um, but at the end of the day, it was still legally possible for somebody other than the top two major candidates to win. They didn't win at the end of the day because voters did not vote for them.
I think
In regards to your term limits, would you say it's the same for all of these other like age limits or mental competence test or
Yeah,
whatever.
I really do think that. I think the solution is don't vote for these people. I can think that some candidates are morons, but if the public votes for them, why should my opinion, override that? Uh, you had this past election, we had some of the oldest candidates for most of the election that were likely to win running. Um, and there's some people that would say that they were too old, or some of them were too old because of like cognitive decline. But other people would say age is experience. Um, and that's a virtue in politics. Certainly, being young makes it difficult. Young people, I mean, I know you don't think I'm young, but for a presidential candidate, I'm one of the youngest people ever to run in American history, and I was the youngest. I wouldn't call myself a major candidate, but I was the youngest candidate anywhere close to the top 20 that ran in 2024, and I'm 35, the minimum age that you can be to be elected. Uh, that age, for people that even knew how old I was, did not help me. It made it harder for me because people think, you don't have the experience, or that you don't have the seriousness to run. But we have had people in their 20s be in Congress, and we have had people in their 30s be in the Senate. Um, our current president was elected, was he 30 or 31? He's one of the longest serving senators when he was a senator in U.S. history. And he got elected very young, either 30 or 31, I don't remember. But he got elected very young for a senator. And we've had other people be pretty young. The vice president-elect is not the youngest, but one of the youngest vice president-elects in American history. Um, and so, yeah, all of these things, people can say, oh, we should have these restrictions in place, but uh, I think voters should be allowed to choose the candidate of their choice, and that the solution isn't to stifle that selection. It's, hopefully people make better decisions. But again, I see people do this all the time where they think, oh, those people shouldn't be allowed to vote, or those people's opinions shouldn't matter. And I think that's very anti-democratic. Even if I think, you know, that a lot of people's vote choices are terrible, I think it would be really bad for the country if somebody can overrule your vote choices just because they think they're more qualified, or there are these arbitrary levels of qualification like education, or business acumen, or political experience. But that's the case. I mean, I've talked to you guys. Oklahoma has one of the oldest age minimums for running for governor. If I remember correctly, it's 30 or 31. That doesn't mean that, that's that old or anything, but there's other states where you can run for state office at 18. And that, again, that doesn't mean you're going to see many teenagers or 20 somethings or even 30 somethings in major state offices, but every state has their own rules, and the federal government has its own rules. And even in the bureaucracy, you have a lot of barriers to entry that require educational requirements. Not every job in the government requires a degree, but a lot of the bureaucratic jobs do. A lot of the ones that are salaried and that have official influence, or are considered officers. There are some that are surprises though. So to be in the State Department, at least at least last I checked, you do not even need an associate's degree. You can technically apply to be a diplomat out of high school. Uh, that doesn't mean you're going to get in. The selection process for the Foreign Service is fairly competitive, but officially, at least last I checked, you do not need to have a college degree. But to be an officer in the military, mostly you need at least some college, and overwhelmingly the officers have bachelor's degrees when they enter. Um, the same goes for a lot of positions. So, you know, formal education requirements, does that actually make them more competent at their job? Is that just a signaling device? Is it just a wise tool to try to weed out people that aren't going to have follow through, or have or be well read enough? There's a lot of different opinions on that, but um, anyway, those are some of my thoughts about legal restrictions against voting, and barriers to entry. I think I think the public has a lot more power to change it, and they just choose not to for whatever reason.
Do you think the existence of these restrictions sets like a bad precedent for our democracy in general? Like kind of like there's no like if you said one restriction, is there like you know like what else can't be restricted if you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think I
The
do. I
slippery
would say,
slope argument?
Kind of.
sorry.
The
Uh,
slippery slope argument.
Well, on the one hand, I think that there should be more openness for access to being voted on and even to bureaucratic offices. But I would say today it's easier than most of American and world history. Like it's easier to vote now, and it's easier to get an education now, and it's easier to get information about federal, state, and local government. I would say than almost any time before. So, I would say it's headed in the right direction. Um, so uh, the precedent thing, if anything, people are concerned it's getting too accessible. Some people, I would not put myself in that boat, but uh, if you think democracy should be more accessible, then the trend is going in that direction in some respects. But in other respects, it's deceptive. Like I said, for example, most people don't realize that the largest state in the Union, California, um, could only pick seven people, I think, seven or eight, I don't remember, legally for president. And they only had one candidate that was legally countable as a write-in. And I know that many people in California voted and wrote someone in, and they don't know that that's not going to count for anything other than a bin that says write-in. Most people do not know that for, every state, depending on the state's rules.
Can you like maybe walk us through your decision on running and like your kind of history, like, the path you took while you ran for president?
Yeah. Um, so the the general view in American politics is that the next election starts as soon as the last one is over. There's already people right now looking at 2028 for the presidential election. I am not one of those. There's already people looking at 2026 for the midterm elections, 2025 for various state and local elections, depending on what state and locality you're in. Um, so and people have started noticing the trend in recent American history is that the primary process, which is the major route today, if you want to actually have a shot at being elected, you got to go through the primary process if it's competitive, and and then usually in the United States, the primary process is the most competitive election you'll go through. The presidential elections tend to be competitive, but for Congress, the primary elections, if they even have a real one, are the more competitive elections. About 90% of Congress seats are not competitive in the general election, meaning they tend to be won by pretty significant margins. Uh, so with that being said, the primary process today is tends to start in New Hampshire, Iowa, and South Carolina, depending on the party. The rules have changed recently, but for much of recent American history, if you wanted to do well and the general election for president was open, you have to start campaigning and then you have to do well in the Iowa caucus. And then if you don't do well, the money tends to dry up and you don't have the resources for the political machine that most people would say is necessary to continue to have a reasonable chance of doing well. So then you go to the first primary in the nation, New Hampshire, and you got to do well there. And then used to be you'd go to places like South Carolina and hope you'd do well there. So when President Biden won, he did not place particularly well for the former vice president in Iowa, and he also didn't place particularly well in New Hampshire. So at that point, and granted, remember, this is like winter of 2020, so a bunch of other stuff is about to happen. But at that point, um, if former Vice President Biden at the time, hadn't done well in South Carolina, it was very unlikely that his campaign was going to continue. But South Carolina, overwhelmingly, the Democratic voters in South Carolina tended to favor his faction of the party at the time. Whereas in New Hampshire, they tended to favor other factions of the party, and Iowa as well. So I'm saying all this because um, in early 2023, people who were vying for the Republican Party primary, the Democratic Party primary was going on. There were other people that ran, but it wasn't considered serious because generally an incumbent on their first term does runs again. So anyway, candidates were coming up to New Hampshire and doing local politicking. They're coming to, a sandwich shop in my little town, holding rallies, there's no huge cities in New Hampshire, but there are some larger cities for New Hampshire, like Manchester, Nashua, even you know, other ones where people will run. I was there. I was looking at the people running, not just for the major parties, but even for other things. Um, and I was like, well, you know, maybe I'll volunteer for a campaign or just support in some way. I'm kind of interested in that. I'm a professional political scientist. Maybe someone will come up and I'll get a little more involved than I have in the past. And I even asked I even hoped other people would run, and nobody else was. So I thought, well, for me, I wasn't interested in good conscience in supporting political parties, and I wasn't really interested in good conscience in supporting anybody who had declared they were running. Um, so I thought, well, okay, the United States has survived idiots being in office before. I'll just wait until 2028, and maybe I'll support somebody else. I may not. I tend to move a lot, so maybe I won't even be in New Hampshire. Um, but I was like, well, I have the time and I know how this stuff works better than most people, and and I have enough. I'm not a millionaire or anything, but I have some savings that I can use, and I think I can see what happens. So early 2023. I think around February, I had said I'm just not going to help anyone, and then I think by March or April, I was like, well, maybe I'll find somebody else, and I'll even be willing to run as a vice presidential candidate. And nobody else was willing to do that, and so I decided, okay, I'll run for it myself. But to run for office for the president, you usually have to have a vice presidential candidate because most states, to get ballot access or write-in access, you need to have a vice presidential running mate. So the Constitution doesn't require you to have a vice presidential running mate to run, but the state election rules generally require you to. Not every state, but the vast majority of states, especially for ballot access. So um, I asked around a bit, and one of the first people I asked was somebody who I had done a significant amount of military deployments with, and I knew him well, and he is a lawyer for the state's attorney's office in Maryland, and he and his wife live in the DC area, and they're pretty knowledgeable about politics too. So I asked him, and he said yes. He, among other things, does things like murder trials, and so he has a family and doesn't have he did not have the time to campaign full time the way I did for so long, but he did say yes, and so I want to say sometime in May or maybe early June, I forget the exact dates, I filed the official paperwork with the Federal Election Commission. And then I got to work on the process of getting ballot access in states. Another difficulty for getting ballot access in states is that if you're not a member of these major parties, sometimes uh, you have minimum windows for running in the general election. Those windows might be far greater for running for the primary election, but for gathering signatures, for example, which is a very common thing you need to do to get ballot access in states. Um, a lot of states didn't open up until a few months before the general election. The last state that opened up, um, I think, if I recall correctly, was Tennessee. If I remember right, you couldn't start gathering signatures until May of this year. And then everything was due by, again, I'm going off memory here, but I think everything was due late July. So, that's still, Tennessee's relatively easy to get ballot access compared to most states. So that's still 2.5 months. But if you're like me, you're trying to do this in every state. And I had 513 days from the time that I started my campaign until election day. And even if I had been able to get to every state, that would have been an average of uh, like 10 and some change days for every state. And even in Oklahoma, which was relatively simple, I wouldn't say easy, but it was relatively simple to get some of the stuff. That still took me several days just to get the paperwork in, to get the elector signatures and to get things notarized. Um, and then you have a place like Texas, I think you had 2 months to get like 200,000 signatures, and they had to be independents too. I'm not even aware there are 200,000 independents, registered independents. Well, they're not registered independents, but people who aren't registered with parties that qualify as independents in Texas. So, um, the first state that I did major campaigning in was Mississippi because they opened very early. And so I was able to actually go and do door to door and like real campaigning and get like certified by local election officials. I started that in mid-June, I think, of 2023. And I spent like 90 days or something down there. I made multiple trips. Um, And while that was going on, they were actually doing state elections. So what I was doing, the door to stuff in modern day for like that level is pretty unusual. And you're not going to see any major candidates knocking on doors. They have very scheduled things, very controlled environments that they meet people with, very controlled environments for especially the media, so that optics are really important. But I was doing that, and it was during the primary and general process. And what was interesting for me was in Mississippi, you have to get your signature certified by county election officials, the circuit clerks, and those are running for office themselves. So some of the people that I interacted with, it wasn't a guarantee I was gonna like, if I came back after their general election, that I was gonna still interact with those same people, which was fine because most of the work I did, it was like turn in something and then get it back. Um, and Mississippi has a filing requirement, and they have state rules, but also because you have to deal with the counties, they have those rules. And then every municipality, town and county I'd go to, I would deconflict with local law enforcement and local election officials, not because I was doing anything wrong, but so out of respect for them, but also so I knew that we were all on the same page and that there wasn't some obscure rule I wasn't aware of that I would be violating. Um, it's very time consuming to do that, but I think it was a prudent thing for me to do because in general, none of them cared, but if anything, the ones that um, I did interact with, they tended to receive that courtesy very positively. So, you know, s even at the state level, in Mississippi, for example, the first major state that I was campaigning in, the state election officials were generally very responsive, and then the county election officials were generally very responsive. There were exceptions, nationwide, but generally, state election officials, the top ones, they do get there by appointment or elections, but they're running because I would say very many of them, they're just trying to make sure the elections run smoothly. Um, so, and by the way, election officials generally are not the ones that make the major election rules, especially for running for president. Those are decided by state legislatures. So sometimes when people run, they're you're running and you're having people that are members of these parties. You're required you you're dependent on them in order to get access to the ballot. And so sometimes people can approach that being like, "Oh, they have something against me, or they're out to get me." And some of them that might be the case, but generally there's legal things that make it hard to do that effectively. And so in my case in Oklahoma, for example, Oklahoma is overwhelmingly dominated by Republicans. I get treated very professionally by the election officials there, who I'm sure when they first saw me thought that I didn't know what I was doing. I mean, I went into the election office there and I said, "Here, I'm here to turn in the stuff for presidential ballot access." And, I waited in a little waiting room for a little bit, and then uh, they asked me some questions. And when I was able to answer those and I had almost everything ready to go, I, I, I got treated very well. I got taken into a little room. They made sure paperwork all lined up. They even identified a few things that I had to fix or do differently, and I was able to get that taken care of really quickly. In other, sometimes that would happen at the local level. For counties and stuff, I'd think, you know, it's a bunch of bureaucracy. So I think a certain form needs to be turned in, or, hey, can I use blue ink? Or like, do they have to give me this information, or will this suffice? And it varies everywhere. But that's generally what I did for 2 years. So from I think mid-June is when I started in Mississippi, and I know my campaign lasted for 513 days, and I drove around the country and knocked on doors and did paperwork and filed filing fees and uploaded YouTube videos and updated my website. And that's what it was. And I did that all myself. Very, 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 very unusual. Um, if you wanted a reasonable chance of doing well in the election, even at the like local level, you have a committee, you have donors, you often know people, you do media, you do various things to get elected. And for me though, my strategy was, if I'm legally able to be voted on, it's 2024 at the time, it was 2024, and people can find out about me if they varying levels of do research, and then I can legally be voted on. And if not, then, the public has made their choice. I obviously disagree with a lot of the election rules, but they did not make it impossible for me to be voted on. The public chose not to vote for me, and they chose to vote for people that make rules so that people like me can't be voted on. So at the end of the day, America does have the ability to change things, but they have chosen not to. And, you know, every individual has their own reasons for things.
Um, Another point I remember from the last like interview we did is that people. You said that people overestimate how much power the like president actually has, like versus like what's like it's the role was like designed to be in like, the Constitution. And do you think like the that has contributed to like politics in general in America being much more theatrical?
Yes, I do. That's a really good question. I do. I think the public perception that the president is powerful and should be powerful and will solve everything. And, you know, it- I was, I've lived all over the world and all over the country. I've lived in areas that tend to support one political party. I've lived in areas that tend to support another political party. I've been in different, professional and social settings that tend to support one or another with plenty of variance. And, if you think back to any election, any of them in recent history, when one candidate wins and another loses, the side that wanted one candidate to win that lost, it's the end of the world, especially for young people, because in my view, it's their first election. So they think, oh my gosh, the one I was sure was going to win didn't win. This is the end of, civilization as we know it. Or, yes, my candidate won. Now everything will be great and the world will be perfect. And I think that a desire to make that so is problematic, because giving it, whatever candidate you want to win, you just ask yourself, the power I'm giving to my candidate of choice, would I want somebody who's not that candidate to have that? And I would say in general, the answer is no. But people approach institutions as something that, as long as it's in the hands of their team, it's okay. And I mean, people even say this about voting. Well, as long as people that vote like me vote, it's okay. But we shouldn't have those people voting. It's too easy for those people. Insert in your head whatever those people are. And um, having the president have all this power, or wanting them to have more power, can, I think, be problematic. That doesn't mean that I think legal ways to give the president greater authority, aren't in place and shouldn't. I disagree, but there's ways and mechanisms to give the president more power. And the president, I would say, is far more powerful today than it was, 150 years ago or 200 years ago. Um, but any major issue area, and this is a perfect time to look at this right now, whether you like the president-elect or you don't, or whether you like the current president or don't, just go back and look at when they ran, because both the current president and president-elect both ran in the past and both won. Um, Look at what they said they were going to do and look at what actually happened, and I guarantee you they don't line up. And that I can have all my reasons why I think these individuals in particular did that, but That's generally hasn't been the case for any president in modern American history because there are legal and social and political barriers to being able to do that. I would get asked all the time on the campaign trail, among other things, about what I thought about the budget or taxation. And my answer in general was that is overwhelmingly a legislative issue. The president initiates the budget process, has a lot of media presence, has a lot of influence in parties. But at the end of the day, the president and they can veto and sign and they ultimately have to sign unless there's a congressional override. But at the end of the day, they are dependent on other people to get a budget passed. And no president knows everything that goes into a budget. There's no way. If you started reading these budget pieces of legislation right now, you wouldn't finish by the end of the year. And even if you sped read it, whatever you define that as, you wouldn't understand it. And no individual does for all that. A bureaucracy is necessary to accomplish things like that if you think that kind of stuff is useful. Declaring war or initiating military actions. There is a lot more power for the president to do that today, but it's not unilateral. And if any president did anything like apocalyptically against what most people wanted, the bureaucracy just wouldn't do it. And the bureaucracy has all these tools at their disposal, legal and extra legal, to inhibit a president or a Congress's agenda. They exercise these tools all the time. That's not necessarily a good thing, in my view, that a bureaucracy can overrule, can inhibit the will of the people, but they do. And so if a president today just absolutely out of their mind was like, I want to launch nuclear weapons on every city in the world that has more than 50,000 people. It wouldn't happen, in my view. Thankfully, we haven't gotten anywhere near that the public is aware of, that I'm aware of, and I don't think we're likely to. But people can resign. People can, in good conscience, stall things. They can. I mean, even a lot of things that get done, a president just doesn't have a clue how it actually gets done. So you require experts to get that stuff done, and those experts may just be like, okay, okay, sir, cool, and then just like go on doing what they were going to do anyway. Um, so yeah, I guess to answer your main question, a lot of it is theatrical because a president wants any government official, when they're running, very often wants to be seen as someone who will solve outstanding problems. And they'll make these claims that only they or they will do better at getting this stuff done. But once in office, there's a big difference between running and governing or legislating. And I think that's one of the reasons you see things not change as much as they do, because the reality of the situation doesn't change significantly from January 19th to January 21st this year. Um, that doesn't mean things don't change, and that doesn't mean the president doesn't have power, but the history of presidential elections and governing in the United States um, has changed over time. Presidents didn't used to do, debates, and they didn't used to, necessarily even tour the country or do a lot of campaigning, especially anything close to what, we see today. But when new media started to form, telegraphs, national newspapers or regional newspapers that could deliver things more easily because of better infrastructure, radio, television, cable news, internet, modern internet, then strategies change. And people today, because anyone with an internet protocol address can access an unblocked address, um, people today, many, especially older people, tend to decry, oh, see, now everyone has access to it. It should only be insert their qualified group that has access to this information or is allowed to run or is allowed to talk or is allowed to post. It was a lot easier back when you had a few newspapers that had major readership or you had a few channels that had major viewership or listenership. And today that's different. And I think a lot of the hand wringing over it is dinosaur dying legacy institutions and organizations that haven't adapted. So I hope I answered your question. I try to answer it in different ways there, but that's my
Would you
views.
say the most significant thing from the 2024 election wasn't the fact that the president is now a different party, but that the Senate is now a different party?
Um, that's a good question. I think the legislature is very important, and so I think that'll have. I think that some things will change. But one thing about rules in these legislatures, which the legislatures, the houses in Congress, write a lot of their own internal rules um, to overcome certain procedural things in the Senate. You have to have 60 votes, and no party has 60 votes. And I mean, you have to have 60 loyal party votes too, because at the end of the day, these candidates, they are running their own campaigns and they're voted on by their people. Yes, parties have a big role to play in the primary process, in the media narrative, and in funding. But at the end of the day, um, you see Congress people vote against what their party trends towards all the time. That doesn't mean that partisanship isn't a big thing in Congress or anything like that. But um, the incoming majority party in, well, no, not incoming anymore, the current now, because they just changed over, the current majority party in Congress and in the Senate has a very slim majority, and a slim majority is more important in the House than it is in the Senate, because slim majorities can overcome procedural things better, um, in certain ways in the House than they can in the Senate. So the Congress partisan makeup did not change significantly. Um, and even the individuals didn't change significantly. Because again, at the end of the day, it is about individuals, I think. So parties have a big role to play, but individual voters and individual legislatures matter. And I told you guys earlier about 90% of congressional elections in the general election aren't competitive, and a large number of those um, they have voted in the incumbent again. So you didn't see a huge changeover in individual makeup between the current Congress and the last Congress, and that's normal. Same way, and even more exaggerated in the Senate because they have longer terms. Uh, so I mean, obviously some things will probably change, but uh, for everybody, in my view, who thinks things are going to change drastically for the better or worse because of this election, I don't think that's the case. And they didn't in the last election, in my view, and they didn't in the one before that or the one before that.
Um, Kind of to come back to like the whole role of the president in versus like what people perceive of it. Do you think
Mhm.
like you to kind of like do you think that's like a big reason as to why in your campaign you didn't have like a very strong ideological platform? Like most
Yes.
independents I see, they like they're very passionate about one strong position, like about like a hot topic.
Yeah. I would get asked about this a lot. And my response largely went along the lines of what I've been saying is like the president is not a policymaker, it's not a lawmaker, or it shouldn't be. And I was really in favor of procedural reform. In my view, like I said, I mean, there are term limits. I was not running even on I was running against even taking a second term if I were to won the 1 in 100 trillion chance I had to win. I made a commitment in my campaign that I wasn't going to seek a second term. And, I think even if that's just a personal commitment, that's not even a legal change. But I think things like that are important. I chose not to take a cent in donations from anybody, not just large parties or committees or anything. I chose not to take a cent from anyone. I chose not to have campaign staff. I wouldn't have really been able to afford that anyway, but maybe I could have scrounged a little more money to hire someone to build my website or hire even someone to coordinate. I mean, even just little things. I'm I think I put about 70,000, 75,000 miles of driving around the country. I went, multiple times, including like Boston to LA, up to Olympia, back to Oklahoma City, and a bunch of shuttling in between, especially east of the Mississippi. That was, if I had hired regional staff, maybe they could have done some stuff. I didn't have anyone, go door to door for me even. And when I started out, I wasn't sure I was going to continue with that. I thought maybe as things went along that I might accept people's offers to volunteer because some people already had. But you the state legislatures make it so difficult to get ballot access, and one of the things they make you do is get signatures, physical signatures. And there's different ways to do that than going door to door, but door to door is one of the ways to do that. And door to door signature gathering for something like I was doing is extraordinarily humiliating. At times is dangerous and is very, very time consuming. So especially after my first couple weeks doing it, I was like, I don't want to ask anyone else to do this. If people want me in office, they'll sign my paper and meet me. I have time to do that. I'm not gonna make this election about donations and large political machines for me. Obviously, that's overwhelmingly what a lot of electioneering is in modern America. But um, besides ways that I ran my campaign, the substantive platform that I didn't take strong theatrical positions on, it's not because I don't think some of those issues are important. It's because A, the president doesn't have as much power to change that stuff as the public thinks or that candidates wanted people to think. But B, that I think a lot of the underlying solutions is to change access to politics and to change um, merit-based appointments. So one of the things I did run on was changing um, the way that a lot of high-level staff would be appointed. There's thousands of positions in the federal government that require presidential nomination and Senate approval. And you won't hear about most of those in the next 3 months. You will hear about a lot of those. Some of them you already have heard about, even though they haven't gone through that process yet. And look at the qualifications of the current people coming in and the people that are leaving. That doesn't mean that they shouldn't be there. Like I'm not I think there can be a whole host of experiences and qualifications and connections that can merit somebody being put into a major policy-making bureaucratic position. But in my view, the top criteria should be, are you good at this? And I do not think that that is the number one criteria that is used to put a lot of these people in these positions. Um, so, and that's not unique to the incoming administration or the outgoing administration. It is how American politics and global politics works. People who are in favor of putting connected or people who were good partisan allies into these positions of policymaking would say politics is about group decision making, and having networks of friends that you can get stuff done with is better than having somebody who's a policy wonk. Or they'll say that having people that know, for example, the president's mindset and agenda, they're going to be more likely to go along with that. So you'll get more unified purpose than having a scattering of like, again, policy experts and things, however you define that. But I think, in my view, I was going to base mine on merit because I didn't know anyone anything. I didn't have any partisan allies. I've never been a member of a party, and I didn't have a cent in donations, so there was nobody for me to repay in that way. And I thought that was really important. So even if I had billions of dollars and I was the nominee of the third largest party in the United States, I still had a 1 in 10 million chance of winning. The way I ran it, I had a one, I'm spitballing these numbers here, but 1 in 100 trillion chance of winning. I knew that from the beginning. And so I said, well, if I do win, I want it to be the right way because I already am enormously disadvantaged anyway. So Procedural reform, I really think is boring and it is important. Me running on that, I do think cost me votes in some ways, but I think other people appreciated that. So, Oklahoma's where I got the most votes. I only got well, I think the last count, Oklahoma counted their votes pretty quickly. I don't remember the exact number. I think it was like 5,000 or 5,100. I got a distant fifth place and fifth and last place in that election. But some people would talk to me or email me or call me and say, "Hey, I want to know your position on, this major thing." And sometimes I would say like, "Look, here's how I think things can be influenced," or I'd say, "Here's some of my personal views on this." But I was consistent that the president's power is limited and that procedural reform is going to make real reform more likely rather than running on these theatrical issues. So that's my thought process behind my website. And anything you saw on my website is generally the type of stuff I would talk to people about day to day anyways. Um, you know, the other thing is on a website or on a commercial or anything, I didn't have any commercials, but on a website or YouTube video, uh, people they're not going to sit there and read through a treatise or a novel. So having concise information, some people would say, have concise, deceptive information. But for me, it was just concise, to the point information about the major things I was running on, procedural reform, campaign, running a campaign a different way that is indicative of that procedural reform. And if I did it again, I wouldn't change that major aspect. Even if I had $10 billion, I wouldn't change that. That's my view at the current moment.
Um, I noticed you talked about how state legislators make it very hard to like get ballot access. Do you think
Yes.
people? I think this is like a growing view I've noticed, especially among like my teachers and like peers in general. Do you think people
hmm
place too much emphasis on national elections versus as opposed to local like and state elections?
Yes. If you care about elections, the election that matters most for electoral rules is your state legislature, more than anything else. That doesn't mean everything else doesn't matter, but for drawing congressional districts, every state has their own rules for drawing congressional districts. Some states, the legislature or executive play a bigger role, but in all of them, at least underlying those decisions, there is a legislative role. And for the decisions that are about minimum ages to run for state or national office, for the decisions about who gets ballot access, whether there's a write-in at all, whether there's early voting, whether you need to show how you get access to be registered to vote in the first place. Those are decided at the state level, and most people don't know anything about that. And then they'll get really upset when a national election goes a certain way, and then they'll continue to look to Congress or the president to do that. The Congress or president, if I had won the presidency, there's not a direct thing generally that I could do to change Oklahoma's ballot rules. There may be some things that people could do, like challenge. You can, if a state election rule contravenes the U.S. Constitution, then you can take it to court. Um, but ultimately, the states are the ones that make the major rules. They are influential. The states draw the congressional districts, but the legislatures have influence in that to varying degrees. And even at the Senate level, maybe the Senate level is where they have the least, but they make rules for ballot access for the Senate too. Decisions about how electors are allocated. So I remember you guys knew this generally when we talked last time, but 48 states, it's winner take all. So whoever gets the plurality, not the majority, the plurality of votes, the most compared to everybody else for president, gets all of those electoral votes, with two exceptions, Maine and Nebraska. And those are decided by those state governments. Those aren't decided by the national government. There is a movement because a lot of people don't like the Electoral College. So there's a movement in some states to say we're going to give our electoral votes to the majority national popular vote getter. And these states are overwhelmingly run by one of the major parties, and they're the party that has twice in recent history lost the electoral vote but won the popular vote. So in my view, it's partisan theater. As if you start to see it go the other way, if anything, you might see the movement switch to where the party now that is at the disadvantage because the electoral college will start saying, "Yeah, we're just going to give our electoral votes to the popular vote winner." But so this movement, I forget what it's called. The pop I should know this, Popular Vote Compact or National Popular Vote Compact or something. Um, it's not actually in place, but it's being proposed to so that all the votes go to the national popular vote winner. What this means theoretically, and Oklahoma is not one of the states pushing for this, but if Oklahoma voted for one of the major candidates, but the other major candidate won the national popular vote, then all seven of Oklahoma's electoral votes would go against the way Oklahoma voted. Um, but again, to do that, the state legislature would have had to approve that. So indirectly, Oklahoma would have voted for that. Um, those decisions are made at the state level too. So a ton of things are made at the state level. A ton of things are made at the local level. So, like I said, this varies. Oklahoma, in my experience, I didn't have to deal with local election officials at all. I literally went into the building in the state capitol in Oklahoma City. I gave them stuff, and I had to get some stuff notarized. So most of my campaigning in Oklahoma was in Oklahoma City and in Miami, in the far northeast of the state. Uh, and when I was in Miami, I had to get things notarized it didn't have to be a local election official. I think I went to a real estate office to get it notarized. Um, so, but in other states, like in Mississippi, for example, the friendliness, the knowledge. I went to a county in Mississippi. In Mississippi at the time, they made you get the voting precinct. Everyone who signed your petition had to write the voting precinct they were in on their signature line. So they had to put their address, they had to sign, they had to put their printed name, and they had to put their voting precinct. I think that was the four things they had to do. Um, Nobody knows their voting precinct, so if I had to go to everyone and I'm already doing something that is unusual. Every second I have to spend in front of somebody's house who, when I was walking up, thought I was selling roofing or bug spray, is going to be 1 second less likely that they're going to sign my thing. So what I would do is I would go to the election officials beforehand, and in each county I would get, if they had it, a map of the precinct. So I already knew what precinct I was in, and I would just tell them, or I just mark it down. Um, I went to one of the a major county in Mississippi, and no election official that I came across even knew what the precinct map was. So there was no way for me to do that in a very populous county in Mississippi. That was on the one hand, a bigger county has more to do, but on the other hand, that also meant a huge county I couldn't do anything in. So and that was based on the local election officials that had nothing to do even with the state. So
Do
yeah,
you
yes, I think state and local elections are important.
do you think that power should lie with the state legislatures, or and that the problems more so the barriers that they created and trying to change them, or is it just, or do you think it would be or do you think those barriers would still exist if it was decided on a national level? As
Yes, I do. That's a really good question though. Like if the Federal Election Commission or Congress were given more power to change local elections, um, you know, the big barriers to entry are being able to be on the ballot and even being able to get write-in access. I think I think every state for every office should count every write-in vote. Um, maybe I think it could be reasonable where you could say they won't count write-in votes if it doesn't make a difference, if one of the major parties gets enough of the vote where it wouldn't matter. I can understand that. But not allowing write-in votes at all, that is ridiculous. And making somebody do anything. Like Oklahoma was very is impossible to do that. I disagree with that. Um, but other states, even that were relatively simple, like Minnesota, I still disagree. Every write-in vote should count. I could make I could make some arguments that it should be constitutional to allow that, or it is constitutional to allow that. But um, for most things, though, I think you would still want the state legislatures to have a lot of power because um, the incentive for giving your own party faction an advantage, it doesn't change at the national level. If anything, it becomes more exaggerated. So if people want election rules to change, they can vote for new state legislators. One of the first solutions to that is you have to know who your state legislator is, which most people do not. So how can you get the change that you want if you don't even know who's running the show? And it's not because it's impossible to find out. It's because people choose not to.
Are you planning? I know you said that this is going to be your last and only presidential election. Is that true for all elections, local and state levels as well?
Yeah, it's my plan. I mean, I haven't made a commitment like said I'm never going to run again, but I have no intention of running again for political office the rest of my life. Maybe that'll change down the line. It's not like when I said I'm not going to run for a second term, that was a commitment. But um, I just realized because I'm in the dark here and I don't want to look as creepy, but no, that doesn't really help anything. But but no, I'm not planning on running again for anything. And another thing is I I I've moved all my life. I was in the military. My dad was in the military, and then I moved around for jobs and stuff. So a lot of elections, it's very difficult for me to run just from a social standpoint. I don't know people in the area. The longest I've ever lived in like one like house or apartment, I think is 3 years or 4 years. Where I'm at currently, I've only been here 2.5, and like two of those were me gone all like very often running for office around the country. So like my neighbors where I live don't know I ran. People in New Hampshire, some people in New Hampshire did. I know some people did, but I did not unless I thought it was going to make or break things. I did not want to campaign in my immediate neighborhood because um, I didn't feel comfortable with people that knew where I lived, knowing all. So, and it just didn't come up anyway. It's not like, oh, that wouldn't have made or broken it. Um, so, it's difficult for in many places they have like residency requirements. So, you got in I think for a lot of state legislatures, you need to be a resident for several years. I'm not currently a resident of New Hampshire. I haven't been a resident for 7 years. I don't know that I've been a resident of any state ever for 7 years. I guess California, I was a resident there for a while, but I'm not currently. So yeah.
Is there like any big thing in particular you learned from your presidential campaign about like the U.S. or the people in general?
Yeah. Well, I there were plenty of nice people. There were plenty of mean people too. Uh, I don't think I was surprised, but people just were very clueless at how elections work. And in some instances, I was surprised at how well received I was. Uh, some areas of the country you would have thought would think certain ways over, and other, you would have thought would think certain ways and they didn't when I would talk to them. And you would be in an area that would be very partisan leaning one way or very partisan leaning another way. And just talking to a person at a door for 30 seconds, you could tell they were not part of the majority. And that's important to know. Like, even in a state like Oklahoma, which is overwhelmingly leans one way for a presidential election, there's still double-digit figures of the millions of Oklahomans that did not vote for the winning candidate. So there's a lot of variety, and you can't judge somebody just by where they came from or even how they, even things you would expect when you see them at the door. Uh, so there's nuance to it. A lot of people do put more than 3 seconds of thought. A lot of people don't. But yeah, I was um, I was also surprised at how difficult it was in some places, though, like to just to get access. And so, just like there was a variety in people's attitudes when you meet them door to door, there was a variety in election officials' attitudes. And that's at at the end of the day, I didn't get shot at or the worst things that happened to me were people being jerks and a little harassment here and there, but um, nothing compared to
A
what a lot of
squirrel
people.
attack.
What's up?
You said the
One of the
squirrel.
worst things that happened to you was a squirrel attack.
Yeah, yeah. No, no. Yeah, no. Like I didn't have to deal with a lot of things that other candidates have had to, or that have in history, or that happen all around the world. So, as flawed as I think things are in the United States, um, you know, just pick another country. You would never want to go door to door around a huge country, in many places doing this kind of thing. So at least I had that opportunity.
I can't really think of any more questions on the top of my head. So, do you have any, Aiden?
Do you have any final thoughts at all? Anything you want to share real quick?
No, just I really appreciate the interest. Most people don't even know I ran, and I think I talked more this time, but we had a conversation before. You guys were very well informed, and your questions were very incisive. Um, not just for a high school student. I just mean like in general. So thank you for giving me the time, and I hope this was interesting to you and anyone else who listens to this stuff. And maybe someday somebody else will run and actually be successful without having to cave into party or donor interests.
Thank you for
We
being
can
super
hope.
cooperative with this. And like, we had to cancel last second last time, but
Yeah,
sorry.
it's all good. No, no worries. Cool.
Yeah.
All
Well,
right.
did you guys have any other questions or anything for me? This is actually perfect timing because my battery is. I have plenty of time left, but we wouldn't be able to do like double this interview like that.
um, Not particularly.
I think we have plenty.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Well, you guys have all my contact information, so you can feel free to reach out to me anytime. I hope the rest of your semester goes well, and I hope, especially for you, Aiden, that your college hunt, you get into every college you apply to, so that your problem is at the end of the semester picking one rather than not having enough choices.
Uh,
I'll keep you informed about that.
Cool.
I'll make
All
sure
right,
to
guys.
whenever we write the blog, I'll make sure to link it to you as well. So,
Okay.
all
Sounds
right,
good, guys. Well, have a good rest of your week. Enjoy your new semester, and I'll see you when I see you.
all right.
All right. Have a
See
good one.
you.
Thank you so
Bye.
much.